Hi there, welcome to the now Presgrove Case. Today we're looking deep into the comparison between Kaden Pressy's timeline and Renee Millan's. Whilst in certain ways it's talking about different stuff happening at different times, literally, there are also some discrepancies along the way, more so focused in on when a specific person arrived at the party house. From Kaden's recollection of Renee Millan, Renee's husband, Stephanie's boyfriend, etc. How it differentiates with what Renee said herself about the time she arrived at the house or at the highway and then onwards towards the house. But when looking at a smaller section of an event like that, if there are discrepancies and if a particular person is incorrect or have got their times out by an hour or a bit or so, that could have a knock-on effect elsewhere to the bigger time frame from Kaden's 5:15 in the morning onwards time frame about being out by an hour. Not that it's his fault, not that he may be fully aware, but that's just what he genuinely believes. And this style of video today is not as a form of gaslighting, right? It's a form of comparison, contrast, and using common sense as well. There is a very, very, very important factor to acknowledge, and I'll be sharing with you the footage today to put it into perspective, and that is taking in mind what Kaden Pressy had to say in regard to the timing of when Renee arrived at the party house, how that differs from the partisan true crime interview to the private police recorded leaked one, in which other things were said or left out. And that's very important because you take one interview away and only listen to one, then you couldn't say that there is a discrepancy of the same extent as there is right now. And that will make more sense later, but just be sure to stick around for the full understanding. And for those that are in attendance during this live premiere, welcome. Be sure to share your thoughts, opinions, reactions, and talk about other stuff in the live chat located on the right-hand side of the screen. And after watching this video, if you've got any additional thoughts or questions, be sure to drop comments down below under the video. It'll help with spreading awareness of this video so then more people get to see it. And then there's new discussions as well. If you are interested in previous coverage, you'll be able to see it top right corner up there, top right eye symbol. Click that, you get the drop down box with the full playlist and some loose videos attached. And if you want to support this channel in other ways, down below in the comment section, pinned message by me, there will be channel membership link to this channel. And the main one, there is a PayPal link. Big shout out to the people last night, Elizabeth, of course, and Peace in Christ for their support on the channel. Positive to see. I wasn't too sure if I was going to come across Elizabeth because I think there was a comment recently where they said that they were going to be out of action or busy doing stuff for about a few months. But regardless, it's good that they were present last night and obviously present during an important time where I gave some predictions and much deeper stuff. If I just give you a bit of reflection in regard to last night and onwards when I looked back, when I actually did watch the live chat replay, just skimming over it, it did seem quite busy, but not quite directed my way, maybe more so amongst different people. It is what it is. If it needs to be, it needs to be. You know, that's a funny contrast, right? When I am locked in or when I'm doing what I should be doing, it's a big contrast to what might be going on in the live chat. So, you know, a few people here and there along the way that might like to do that towards me in a negative way, but then reflecting back on how some could be in chat and how the chat can be in general, it's a massive contrast. People could be talking about whacking each other with bananas, and then here I am talking about the case. Says a lot, doesn't it? But the live chat, freedom of speech, open, see how it goes. But what I sensed, what I saw upon reflection is just about everything that I've predicted in my mind and in the past. So it doesn't surprise me there. But anyway, today we are getting serious. We are focusing in. We have previously done comparisons already, but I want to go a little bit further this time. I want to use a bit more material this time and compare and contrast. So there will be an order to how we'll do things today. I'll probably play to you the clips first with what Kaden Pressy had to say, and then another clip of what he had said in regard to a different interview, one by one. Then we'll contrast or compare it to what Renee said in her written statements on Facebook. Take in mind what's important is the overall consistent theme of today. Video material, interview material, online public statement by Kaden to Renee. It's all words only. Words, which I guess people would say is hearsay or along the lines of that. We're not actually seeing any hard evidence anywhere at this moment in time. So it is open for interpretation. It's malleable. We can go in different directions, and multiple directions are needed. Just me uttering some words at the start of this video in regard to looking at it from other viewpoints towards Renee. We know some will throw the toys out the pram and then instantly assume, oh, you're anti-Kaden Pressy, bad person, you don't believe it's murder, oh, you're this, you're that. That's silly, petty behaviour. We see that more with time. That's unfortunate. But honestly, in my mind, the way piecing it together and trying to understand it is like a raw process. So what I'll do, just make sure everybody is ready, focused, more so in the live chat, so everyone's ready to take it in. And I think there are some subtitles as well. I'm sure it won't be too problematic to show on screen. It should be okay, unless I just use the audio only. It depends how clear it is, right? To avoid any copyright, dodgy stuff like that, I might just use the audio only to be safe. Hopefully you understand. I'll play that from maybe the police interview or the Partners in True Crime interview. Not quite sure what order I'll do it in, but that's what will come first. And then I might talk a little bit, and then I'll go to the Renee Millan bit and then analyse afterwards and give you my raw thoughts in a certain order. And we'll see if we can branch the gap between Renee and Kaden in the matter of what Kaden Pressy says and what Renee Millan says that could be both true in regard to a certain theme or factor. But in terms of the timing, that's where the main issue lies. So without further ado, let's begin this video and start.
Jack Newton busts through the door saying Noah is dead. Noah is dead, guys. Like, frantic. I could almost see he was tearing up. And so he burst back out the door immediately. And I look at my phone because it felt like I just went to sleep.
Right.
And it was 5:15. And so I wake up Isaac, Mikey, and Brylan. Isaac, Mikey, and Brylan, yeah. And we all load up in my red Jeep Cherokee and go down to where Noah was.
I just wanted to stop it there because, first of all, to highlight the time of the 5:15 and the bursting through the door, that what you just heard, that audio is specifically from the private police recorded interview of June 2024, but it's also consistent, not word for word, but in terms of the timing of it and how it played out in regard to what was mentioned in July, kind of like just under a month later when it came to that informal or semi-formal interview on YouTube, which Partners in True Crime did with Kaden Pressy in regard to bursting through the door at 5:15 and checking his phone. In the Partners in True Crime Part 2 never publicly released interview, when Alicia was doing the speaking on behalf of Kaden, brought up again about the timing and it being confirmed that was the time because the phone data, or there is evidence out there processed by police that shows when Kaden was touching his phone to check the time, maybe turning the phone on or activating some kind of service, weather app or anything in the background which would highlight activity on that phone at that given time, and if it being 5:15, then it's reinforced and then it's all set in place. But even if there is hard evidence publicly, we've just not seen it. We've been told that there is hard evidence to support it, but we've not been shown it. So it could still be considered hearsay from the likes of what Alicia had said. But the positive is, out of everything, let's be realistic, out of everything in this case, and like which involves Kaden Pressy in different times, the 5:15, even if it is incorrect, even if it is out by 1 hour 15 minutes, it's the one timestamp which has remained glued in place from almost like day one. It's never really changed, or at least how Kaden has uttered it through his mouth, in parts in true crime, to before that, the private police recorded interview. It's always been worded as 5:15. So why is that one specific timestamp set in place consistently, but other recollections and times aren't always as secure or stable when you compare and contrast with different material of what Kaden had said in the different interviews? Take in mind that this particular 5:15 timestamp, we're not directly comparing that actual time to the Renee Millan situation, but this 5:15 timestamp is the beginning of it all. So anything after that, if there's discrepancies or it can be countered and debunked, possibly with what other people say, then it can have a knock-on effect, but backwards, trailing back to the original 5:15 timestamp on other events, which is the news of Noah's death, which then can make you question more and then think, what else could be incorrect? What else could be a mistake? See that? A knock-on effect, a chain reaction with a particular theme, particular event later on past 5:15 onwards, which would be returning back to the house onwards. And I do have a bit of audio there in regard to that. But before I do that, one other thing I just wanted to highlight and question is, when Jack had burst through the door, supposedly at 5:15, the door, it banging against or near to the wall, loud enough to wake Kaden Pressy up. But then for Kaden to say, from then on, after hearing what Jack had to say about announcing the news and it being quite loud and abrupt, besides the banging at the door, Kaden had to wake the other guys up. How come the other guys weren't woken up like Kaden was by the bang of the door? Is it just down to the other guys were in a deep, deep sleep? It's just because, you know, how noise can travel, and more so specifically where Kaden was asleep, the other guys were very close by. So you'd think a loud bang would disrupt everyone within that area and all be woken up. Yeah, that didn't seem to be the case. See, what Carter Combs has said at some point, maybe going against Kaden Pressy, trying to support Jack Newton's point of view, but other areas Carter Combs talked about in regard to how Jack made his presence known and how he informed people regardless of the time. Carter Combs, what she said there was actually more in line and consistent with what Kaden Pressy was referring to. And then when Jack Newton spoke about it himself on what he did, and I think it was from the Partners in True Crime last interview of Jack himself, in which Robin Smith, Ashley Chadwick reacted to, Jack just came up with something completely different, which was a shock, in which at whatever time Jack had got back to the house, he calmly walked in. He did not slam or bang the door. He went to Carter Combs, I think, placing his head in her, or in a pillow, and then letting it out with a sigh in a saddened but not loud way about he's gone, Noah's dead. And then at some point, Avery being on a chair or resting on a chair, and Avery saying, "What's wrong, Jack?" And then Jack explaining it one by one to each person. Sounds very calm and slow paced. What the hell's that all about? What Jack was getting at. Jack didn't burst through the door. Jack didn't shout. Jack didn't tell everyone all at once. And yet Carter Combs, the girlfriend that's supposed to be backing Jack up in regard to the timing of it, in terms of the details, it matches more so what Kaden Pressy was referring to. So let's not forget about that. There's a bit of oddness going on there, and I hope people make notes about it. Okay, the inconsistencies, then also individually how Kaden had to wake people up, even though the bang should have been loud enough to wake them up. Depends how you look at it. The exception would be is maybe when Kaden said he woke the guys up, the guys were somewhat awake but still half asleep by the noise. And Kaden was like, come on guys, we've got to get going to get to the scene. And in regard to the scene and onwards, 5:21 supposedly arriving, 5:30 being told to leave and then go back to the party house, which was roughly mentioned in the police interview and somewhat consistent with the Partners in True Crime interview. But at that point of getting to the party house, returning, what happened then onwards and how does it tie in with the Renee Millan situation? Let's continue the audio.
Isaac, Mikey, and Brown, they all go back to sleep. And I don't know what to do at the moment. So I turn on the TV to try to get it out of my mind of what I just seen. And I watch TV for, I'd say about 30 minutes to maybe an hour. Because whenever we left, it was pitch black. And so girls start coming out of the room. Their boys are still asleep. We watch TV, and Renee Millan, Jasmine's mother, and her husband, and Stephanie Millan, and her boyfriend show up to the house. And this was right as it started getting dawn. I mean, like, whenever the sun started coming up. Like, you couldn't see the sun, but you could see outside.
Right, for a second.
From what everyone's saying on the group.
That's fine.
After listening to that part, you could clearly tell that no direct time was actually mentioned in the police interview. You can still work it out yourself, which would add up to the Partners in True Crime interview. But in actually stating a time, like, yes, at 5:15, that's when Jack burst through the door. But there was no mention directly about at 6:30 Renee arrives, kind of like how it was worded in the Partners in True Crime interview. And I will play that clip to you just a bit later to put it in comparison in regard to the language and wording, how Kaden words it there with a lack of confidence, and yet in his police interview, what we just heard, he didn't actually give a confident statement of a direct time. In terms of working it out though, we can just do that on the spot right now. And that's in regard to when Kaden, when the other guys were told to leave the highway by an unknown truck driver, getting back to the house. How long would that take? Maybe 5 minutes or so, or a bit less, depending what speed you're going at. About, let's just say, 5:35 or so, getting back to the house. And as Kaden said, guys go to sleep like nothing ever happened, which is a bit weird, doesn't get acknowledged enough. Kaden just watches TV as a distraction because he just can't sleep, which is understandable. To get out of his mind with what he's just seen, because it's quite scarring and just intense. And then the girls come along, or some of them do, and Logan as well, and Logan's name was mentioned, I believe, in the Parts in True Crime, so there's a bit of consistency there. Watching TV, 30 minutes up to an hour long. So if you've just got back to the house and it's what, like 5:35, or I'll just do it basic, 5:30, watching TV for 30 minutes, add that on, that would be 6 in the morning. And then if it was up to an hour long, add on another 30 minutes, and then you've got 6:30, which is the time in which Kaden mentioned in Partners in True Crime. So, I mean, you could still argue and say there is consistency there, but it's just weird how in one interview, Kaden gives the direct time, and then in the other one, he breaks it down but doesn't give the direct time. You've got to work it out yourself, which maybe it's not a big deal, but the language and wording behind it does differ from one to another. And if there's a lack of confidence or a lack of certainty, it is open to interpretation. Mistakes could be made along the way. It depends how you look at it. It's not an attack on anyone, but it's just using a bit of reasoning ability here and there. So with that being said, 6:30 when Renee supposedly turns up at the house itself. I think maybe the one detail that wasn't mentioned, or a time that was not mentioned whatsoever in the police interview, comparing it to what was actually mentioned in Partners in True Crime, where actual timestamps were given from 6:30, Renee arriving. Kaden had said in that particular interview, Partners in True Crime, that Renee spent at least 30 minutes at the highway as well. So the timing when it all came about and when the person actually arrived, such as at the scene, would differ greatly to the time which Renee says herself, which is about 7 in the morning. So depending on how you work it out, Renee had appeared at the house at 6:30 and before that spent 30 minutes at the highway, almost getting towards the highway, the scene, at around 6 in the morning or around 6 in the morning or 6:05 roughly. And yet Renee had said she got, and I'll show you it myself later, the screenshot, I'm just doing it from here. Renee said she got to the highway at 7 in the morning. So basically Kaden's implying that Renee was at the highway at 6 in the morning and spent 30 minutes there and then went down to the house. Renee saying she got down to the scene, the highway, at 7 in the morning and then spent maybe like 2 to 5 minutes there and then went on to the house. So roughly speaking, there is a 1 hour time difference. And what's most interesting about that is I don't think it's the first time there's been like a 1 hour time difference or a bit of a gap from 30 minutes to 1 hour. For example, when Kaden Pressy made reference himself in I think it was the Partners in True Crime, or it might have been the police recorded one. It was one or the other interviews where Kaden Pressy had said the video which he recorded of Brylan slapping Noah was at something like 1:30 in the morning, something like that, or was it 2:30? No, 1:30. And then people said to me, "You got it wrong, ref," but I didn't. I was just relaying what Kaden had said at the time, and when comparing it to the actual hard evidence, what we saw, it was actually 1:05 in the morning. So out by like 25 to 30 minutes. Mistake made. Yeah, but how many more? So if you've got a 1 hour time difference or so with the time Kaden says Renee arrived at the highway compared to what Renee says herself getting to the highway, a 1 hour time difference there, maybe a mistake made. Just so happens that the other 1 hour but 15-minute timestamp difference would be with the overall thing of 5:15, the beginning of the news of Noah's death, and then comparing it to what others have suggested collectively from when listening to Renee to then listening to Jack Newton with the 6:05 call made to his father Caleb, that what Stevie Howard suggested, and maybe some other people along the way, that it wasn't 5:15 when the news of Noah's death was announced, or when Jack made it back, it was actually 6:15. That would mean it's like a time difference of 1 hour, 15 minutes. Which one's right? Which one's wrong? Is it wrong because it's done with manipulation, or more so done wrong because of an accident, mistake, and the person just isn't aware of that? But if a mistake was made, would anyone know the actual truth, such as Alicia? would anyone, and this is not coming from my words or mouth, but would anyone out there argue and suggest that Kaden might genuinely believe it's that time of 5:15, but Alicia may know the actual time, but if a mistake was made, it's too late to change it now. So it's best just rolling with it. Who knows? Just a little side point there mentioned. But anyway, before we jump onto the Renee Millan statements and the contrast, I'll just add on now what Kaden Pressy had said in regards to the situation with Renee arriving at the party house, how it's worded differently in Partner's true crime interview compared to the police interview, and how some things are missing and other stuff has been like added in or worded a bit differently. And I want you just to analyse yourself the language and wording, and then we can come back and then go from there.
At that around close to that time, Renee Millan shows up, and
can we just say who Renee Millan is?
Renee Millan is Jasmine Millan's mom. I'd say she got there around 6:30. At that time, I have the idea like, hey guys, we need to clean up the beer cans, because at the time we were all under the assumption that he got hit by a vehicle, and I didn't want no one to get in trouble for having alcohol there, you know. So I say, let's clean up the beer, and we clean up. Renee's talking to Jasmine by her vehicle in the driveway, and so overheard Renee talking to Jasmine, saying that they were at the scene for about 30 minutes before they showed up to the house, and we get all the beer cleaned up and everything. And shortly after that, Renee tells me that we need to give her all the guns. And I was saying like, oh, I can take them. I'm heading back that way anyways. And she was like, she was adamant of her taking them. And so they go and get the guns and give them to Renee. They load them up. And right after that, Renee tells me that we need to load all the beer in the house up into one of the coolers, and I need to take it home with me.
Okay. Let me stop. Go ahead.
They said that we should leave before the police get there, because it's just going to cause a whole extra scene if there's more people there whenever they get there. We left close to 7, if not at 7.
So hopefully after listening to that, you can hear the difference in style of communication and delivering the actual timestamp. The Partners in True Crime one was more direct, 6:30. But the private police recorded one, he didn't mention 6:30. He just mentioned that at 5:30, getting back home to then watch TV from 30 minutes up to an hour long. An estimate, pretty rough, not confident, not quite certain. Keep that in mind. So then when you listen to the Partners in True Crime interview where he says, I would say around about 6:30, it's not, I know it's 6:30, it is 6:30. My phone said 6:30, like the 5:15 reference. No, it's I'm guessing, I'm thinking. It's not said with absolute confidence. And obviously if it's delivered with not absolute confidence, there is room for questioning and other possibilities of different times. And just the police interview estimation of 30 minutes to an hour long of watching TV, not quite sure with that either. But then again, it's like Renee Millan's Facebook statement where she says between 5:45 to 6 in the morning, when my daughter, partygoer Jasmine Millan, called me about the news, in between a period of time. It's just not good enough, is it? And if you're giving an estimate within a private police recorded interview, it's not rich enough, it's not evidence-based enough in the moment, but it's more likely to be more honest in how it's worded, if that makes sense. See, at the end of the day, of course, when you add it up, still totals 6:30, regardless of Partners in True Crime or the police interview. But in terms of how the lines and the words are delivered, you might mention additional more details in one interview over the other. Normally, that would be associated with the police private interview more details expressed and explained and talked about there because it's more sensitive to the case, mentioning certain times and certain names and locations which probably wouldn't normally come up in a public interview because you've got to protect information and evidence. But clearly, from what you saw, heard, witnessed yourself, a very specific time from the Partners in True Crime interview, what you just heard, overheard Renee talking to Jasmine at the party house about spending 30 minutes at the scene of the highway. That was never mentioned or brought up in the police interview. A 30-minute time spent at the scene by Renee and then getting to the house at 6:30, meaning she got to the highway at around 6 in the morning. And to get at the highway at 6 in the morning, but for Renee in a Facebook statement to say from 5:45 to 6 in the morning, getting the call about Noah's death and then having to spend like 40, 50 minutes to actually drive on down to the place, there's a big 1 hour time difference slot. So it is a bit problematic. Was there anything else that needed to be mentioned? Well, if I do think of anything else, I can always refer back to it later. But the other important point, and it's actually a very, very important one, some could argue don't look too deep into it, and then others who may hear what I'm about to say could take it the wrong way. What I will say is, as a disclaimer, what I'm about to say could sound very dark, but it's also realistic based off the wording and language that was used in that Partners in True Crime interview, which was not replicated in the police interview, and I'm not surprised. In regard to Kaden Pressy saying it was his idea to clear up the beer cans and rubbish at the party, primarily because they thought Noah's death was a hit and run. You see where this is going? That Kaden Pressy wanted to protect other people in case they got trouble with the police. That can go one of two ways. One, Kaden Pressy knew that social hosting laws were broken, but still had alcohol here and there like how other people did. That Kaden Pressy did not want to get in trouble, more so he didn't want other people to get in trouble because he is a selfless, which is a positive, looking out for other people. He didn't want others to get in trouble. He didn't want the police to find out that social hosting laws were broken then. And with the supposed mention of Renee urging him to move the beer cooler and other alcohol, disposing of it, moving it on, getting it away from the place, that in itself feels like a cover-up in terms of masking over that social hosting laws were broken. Number two, how you interpret it from how Kaden said, well, we thought it was a hit and run which caused Noah Presgrove's death. And because of alcohol being at the party, I didn't want anyone to get in trouble for it. So you're telling me, if you thought it was a hit and run, and there was a slight bit of doubt in your mind that it could have been caused by one of the party goers, hence because of drunk driving, hence because of alcohol being distributed at the party itself, and if anyone had been leaving at a point in time, they could have been responsible for a hit and run of Noah Presgrove. So Kaden Pressy thought it was a good idea to tidy up and clean up, his idea, as he states, to protect whoever from getting in trouble with police. This really sounds bad. I'm sure Kaden Pressy more so was meaning it in a more innocent way, didn't want any underage people to get in trouble with police from drinking at the incorrect age, and that was all. But the way that sentence was structured by Kaden Pressy basically implies that in that moment, Kaden Pressy, from his own wording, supposedly was covering up the possible death of Noah Presgrove. I want every single human and every single witness, including those lurking in the background, to listen very carefully to what I just said there and not to twist it. And if any people do try twisting it or start attacking me, I want every single witness present right now to clip what I just said before and use it as evidence in the future. Okay? And I'll go over it one more time. And I know some people say I repeat it, but it's obviously needed because when I do say shocking, deep, dark stuff, it can penetrate people's minds and penetrate much more. It depends how people react to it, and it doesn't always end too well, as we know. There's only so much I can do. So what I'm getting at is, you think it's a hit and run collectively, that Noah Presgrove had been knocked down, hit by a moving vehicle. As to who's responsible, who knows? But because alcohol being at the party and people drinking there, Kaden didn't want anyone to get in trouble with police. You tie it together, it's as if, oh, party goer, drinking, then left, hit and run with Noah because they were drunk driving and drove off. Kaden didn't want anyone to get in trouble for that. So he wanted to protect people. And the massive contrast and interest is, it's been the light side pushing it quite some time about the dark side covering up the death of Noah Presgrove, covering it up as a form of foul play. Well, what Kaden Pressy had single-handedly did in that public interview on Partisan True Crime, Kaden was willing to at least clean up evidence of social hosting laws being broken in an attempt to protect other party goers. Because he's friends with them, it's a selfless, positive act, but you're trying to cover up something. And if you interpreted it towards the concept of drunk driving leading on to a hit and run, that's kind of like covering up the death of Noah Presgrove. I'm sure Kaden didn't mean it like that, but that's how it definitely comes across. So when people like to push foul play or push the idea of cleaning up stuff at the highway or from the property, moving things on, disposing of stuff, sounds like Kaden Pressy, to begin with, had the ideas in regard to cleaning up stuff, hiding things, moving stuff away, or being ordered to and following on with that. That sounds very questionable and dodgy. Does that mean to say that Kaden Pressy is responsible for Noah's death? No. No. But in terms of cleaning up stuff, it just seems a bit dodgy, right? If you're willing to protect others so they don't get in trouble for what exactly? Hit and run? Drunk driving? Social hosting laws being broken? Didn't want the police to catch on to that, it would get messy. See, when people like to push and push and push the social hosting laws and not enough is being done and that there needs to be justice and Avery is just literally out there, no slap on the wrist, no punishments, nothing, moving on, oh, they should be punished and bad things should happen. It sounds like Kaden Pressy at the time was more passionate about covering up social hosting laws being broken than Avery, the host, was. How many attempts did Avery Howard, how many attempts did Avery Howard make to clean up and hide the social hosting laws being broken? You know, hide the alcohol, nothing to see here. Because it sounds like Kaden Pressy was the one with all the ideas in regard to that. Very dark thinking, but very realistic. The measurement of my realisticness and how I penetrate will be measured by the level of resistance, depending on how people listen. So, I really hope that's been made very clear. I've not seen a single person mention it before, to my knowledge, so it needed to be brought up there and then. As in regard to any of the bits and bobs, such as the time of actually leaving the house to go back home and drop the guys off, which Kaden was like the taxi driver service. Close to 7 or at 7 in the morning when Kaden left because he was told to. Well, at 7 in the morning, that's supposedly when Renee says she got to the highway at least, and then a bit onwards got to the house. So clearly it doesn't quite tie in, does it? There's a problem. Just to refer back to a previous point though, because it is important, the mention of firearms, that Renee wanted them rounded up and to be collected and then handed back to people afterwards. Kaden Pressy only mentioned 3 firearms and that was it. More than one gun, making it guns with an S. I'm interpreting it that there's only 3 firearms at the party. No mention of any others. Maybe there was, but I've not seen that. 40 people at the party in total, coming and going. How many firearms were at the party? After all these months, not a single answer. The only mention of firearms is by Kaden Pressy, a blackout AR-15 rifle with a thermal scope belonging to Jack Newton, a 12-gauge shotgun belonging to Isaac Rojas, noted in that 1:05 timestamp Monday morning footage of Brylan slapping Noah and Isaac's in the background with Avery and holding his shotgun, and Brylan Sweat's hunting rifle. 3 guns, no other mentions of any others. That's a problem. That's not been answered. But to focus in on the main issue, what I have here, why on earth would Renee need to round up any of the firearms in the first place? Or let's put it this way. Why would Renee need to round up 2 of the 3 firearms up to return back to the rightful owners when 2 of the owners to the firearms are literally stood right in front of her at the house itself? Isaac, Brylan are at the house at the time of when Renee's there, wanting the firearms to be collected and then handed over to the owners later. Hunting rifle, Brylan. 12-gauge shotgun, Isaac. The owners are in possession of their own firearms at the house. They can go home with them. Why does Renee need to pick them up, take them away from the owners to then give them back to the owners later? What? Makes no sense. Oh, is it because the guys can't be seen holding firearms or storing them in Kaden's vehicle? Well, supposedly how it's been worded and all by Kaden, it didn't stop him from being ordered to store a cooler or beer or alcohol in Kaden's vehicle at least, which you could still get in trouble for if you got caught. So what's the difference with firearms then? Weird. And of course, we'll look at Renee's counterpoints to all this as well, besides the time, but just the whole deal with collecting the guns. What's the point when they already are in the presence of their owners? The exception, of course, being Jack Newton. If Jack's firearm was at the house, which it's been said it was, but Jack is still at the highway. Jack, I don't know who mentioned it now. I'll be honest, I can't remember. But it was mentioned by a key person that Jack Newton stored his firearm differently towards everybody else. Jack stored his firearm and locked it up in one of his vehicles. Which one was it? The Ford Ranger, if that's what it's called, or a side-by-side? Because if Jack had a firearm stored in a vehicle which was at the party house at the time where it was collected from, but Jack was at the highway, Jack would have used another vehicle to get to the highway, meaning Jack's away from his firearm, meaning it would need to be collected and then handed to Jack eventually. I get that, that's the exception. But as for Brylan, as for Isaac, they've got their guns, they can go home with them. They don't need them taking away and then returning afterwards. It just seems very pointless. So that's what I don't quite get there. But nevertheless, with that being said, I think we need to move on now with some of the counterpoints. Here we are. So this time round, this particular screenshot is a bit bigger in size because we have referred to it previously in the past, but it was actually cut off. It was cropped. I don't know why people cropped it in the past, but it's nice to have a bit more to it. Now, it doesn't seem to be the full extent, but there's a bit more added on top, which I might have not seen before. So I'm going to read it out to you. Hopefully you can see it on screen. If not, I will try and zoom in just a little bit. And we'll go from the top. Renee Millan, April 29th, probably 2024. Renee says, and this will be in regard, roughly, and in response to Kaden's interviews, right? More so the, I guess, Partners in True Crime one. Renee says, I have no clue where people get their information from, facepalm. No, I didn't clean up anything at the house. Well, okay then. I mean, Kaden Pressy said it was his idea to clean up. So they seem to be in line there. Renee says, I arrived at almost 7 or around 7 in the morning. Now, there is a slight problem here, maybe, when reading this and then reading the next slide or two, because how it's interpreted here, Renee arrived at the party house at 7 in the morning. I'm sure on a different slide, Renee said she tended to Jack, who was at the highway at around 7. So there are possible discrepancies there. I thought I'd just add it in on top of everything else. Renee says, actually, when I pulled up and things were being picked up, as in at the house, I told them it's pointless. The police will know this was a party. The only reason why you would be cleaning up or covering up a party when cops are going to come round, you don't want anyone to get in trouble, like what Kaden said, is either because you're trying to cover up the social hosting laws being broken so no one gets in trouble, including the host Avery, and or you're covering for the person that could be caught up in a hit and run, which you believed was the case at the time, the death of Noah Presgrove. So it doesn't look good on Kaden Pressy there, with Kaden outright himself saying he was cleaning up to try and help people not get in trouble. And of course, if you want justice for Noah or justice in a case investigation, then you wouldn't be tidying up anything at all. Of course, that can apply to other possible party goers with Noah's golf clubs, well, Dalen Presgrove's golf clubs and bag. Shouldn't be moving anything whatsoever. So let's just put that into perspective and balance. Renee says, after talking to a few of the party goers, I told them that they would be the first ones investigated because they were the last ones to see Noah alive. So kind of reinforcing that you should still stick around because you'll be a person of interest. But Kaden's saying, well, Renee told us to leave. Renee does say here, secondly, talk of me removing guns is made into something it's not. The kids that were leaving said they had a few guns in their vehicles. Right. Don't know what kind, because I'm not a gun person, but all I know is big ones, so I put them in my vehicle to take them where they belonged. But where they belonged to some of those party goers. So why would they leave their guns behind if they're leaving anyway? Unless it's because they've got their own vehicles with their guns, but they can't drive themselves because they're drunk, so they rely on Kaden Pressy for a taxi service. But Kaden was drinking along with the other party goers, and by then they probably all should have sobered up anyway. In regard to Mikey, though, the age he was at the time, and maybe Brylin and Isaac, were they of the age? Were they driving at the time? Did they have a driver's license or not? Because it wouldn't match up with what Renee's getting at here. You know what I'm saying? It's only what we're aware of, Jack Newton, who left his gun in his vehicle, whilst Jack was in a different vehicle at the highway, from how that's been interpreted. But yeah, the kids that were leaving at what time though? Leaving at the time when Renee arrived. Well, if the kids were leaving at that time, why would they leave their guns behind when leaving? Why not take them with you? I don't get that. Renee says, don't know what kind. Okay. And then after that, Renee says, I never told anyone to leave the house. Yet Kaden Pressy says Renee told him and the guys to leave the house. So one person's telling the truth, the other person is lying. Why? What's the point in lying about that? It's weird, isn't it? The house was never cleaned with anything at all, because to my knowledge, the house wasn't cleaned for weeks to make sure law enforcement didn't need to come back for anything. Of course, in a different discussion, whether that be mentioned by Kaden Pressy or another individual, Kathy Bingham, private investigator, came onto the scene of the case 3 days after Noah Presgrove's death, spent 3 days at the party house and witnessed the Millan family go back to the house and do a deep clean for 3 days straight. In recent time, people from the dark side have said it's been debunked and it was a load of BS, it never happened. So why would that story need to be made up in the first place then? Just seems a bit silly. But anyway, in terms of what Renee says here, to my knowledge, the house wasn't cleaned for weeks to make sure that the police didn't need to come back for anything. But did they ever come back in the first place? Did they ever search in the first place? And supposedly that wasn't the case. Wasted opportunities, maybe. Homeowner's decision, not mine. The time Jasmine Millan, the daughter to Renee, called her, Renee, about the news of Noah Presgrove's death would have had to have been between 5:45 a.m. to 6 a.m. And just based off that time alone, it doesn't quite match up with Kaden Pressy exactly. Because, Renee says it takes me about 40 to 45 minutes to actually get to Terrell. And then getting to the scene of the highway, spending some time there, 5 minutes, then getting down to the party house. It's going to be 7 in the morning onwards. From Caden's timeline, by 6 in the morning onwards, 30 minutes later, Renee was supposed to be already at the house. Yeah, it just doesn't match up. Anyway, Renee said, I had enough time to jump up, get dressed, and leave. I have never told a kid not to talk to actual law enforcement agencies. I did in fact tell 2 nephews and my daughters, meaning Jasmine Millan and Stephanie Millan, not to talk to a private investigator not working with actual law enforcement agencies. Oh, does that apply to Kathy Bingham then? Because if so, Kathy Bingham had supposedly interviewed 2 of Justin Roy's family members and Kaden Pressy on different occasions, 2 times, who has been the root of more of these BS rumours. Okay. So when Renee Millan says, I told 2 nephews and my daughters not to communicate with private investigators that are independent because they have been the root of problems in regard to BS rumours that I can't keep up with. So that could apply to Kathy Bingham then, maybe. I mean, who is that, or who are those private investigators that Renee are truly referring to, because no name's mentioned here, but based off interpretation, you could argue and say, maybe Kathy Bingham. Who else? And what other rumours were spread at the time in regard to what Renee's referring to here? If anyone can provide context, leave a comment below. Renee says OHP talked to the people there, and then OSBI talked to them that evening, along with OHP talking to them again that next week. And all party goers besides the 4 Texas kids and a couple parents willingly handing their phones over to be dumped. And yet Kaden said he willingly handed it over, but the police didn't want it, and it took a few months. Yes, Jasmine Millan and another girl gave him and another male friend showers at the same time. Interesting. Don't know why we're jumping about here earlier on in the timeline, but Jasmine Millan and another girl known as Carter Combs gave him, as in Noah Presgrove, a shower. But to say and another male friend showers, I can understand how it's been worded, but I also understand how people interpreted it in the past. Other people interpreted it in the past as it was like some kind of threesome in which 3 people were washing Noah. But how it's mentioned here by Renee herself it would be interpreted that Jasmine Millan and Carter Combs not only were physically giving Noah Presgrove a shower, a wash, but also one of Noah's friends. Well, at least of how we've heard of it since by different people, from Carter Combs to whoever else, key people, key names, that Noah Presgrove was escorted to the shower area because he wasn't quite stable enough, and basically Carter Combs and Jasmine Millan helped keep him upright, and that was all. Noah Presgrove washed himself. Then at some point, one of Noah's best buddies jumped on into the shower and they were messing about. And that was pretty much it. So Renee words it as if Jasmine and Carter were physically touching Noah, as in washing in all areas, and Noah's friend. But from what we've heard elsewhere, they weren't that hands-on. They were just simply holding Noah up so he didn't fall over, and that was it. So you can see there's a few little discrepancies along the way, but what I want to refer back to is the mention about with OHP the next week, all party goers, besides 4 Texas kids and a couple parents. The term besides, does that mean excluding, or does that mean with the exception of others who are of a different group also cooperated? It might have been just how I interpreted it there. But the mention of only 4 Texas kids, only 4. That's not many. I thought there was more than 4 Texas people, unless I'm wrong. Why would a couple of parents need to hand their phones over? Is that in regard to conversations and call logs to match with when certain partygoers reached out to their parents, maybe when needing to be picked up, or when arriving at the house, or when saying that they were going to leave? Maybe. But clearly, from reading this, it goes against counters Kaden Pressy's points. And we've done that before, but a bit of extra information was added on. This one, which was at a different time, or it might have been more so in a comment section. We'll see about that. Renee Millan, the blatant lies this kid is saying. This kid is basically Kaden Pressy. Renee is calling out Kaden Pressy for lying about me. It blows her mind. Renee says, I've been honest and told exactly what I did from the time I got Jasmine Millan's call between 5:45 to 6 in the morning until that night that I got home. I have no reason to lie about anything. Just weird that Kaden feels the need to lie so much. Ultimately, if there were discrepancies and things not all was true, how much of it are lies, how much of it are mistakes? Getting the time mixed up somehow can be a mistake. But the difference of saying, well, Renee told us to leave, we had to leave, and then Renee saying, no, I never told them to leave, there's a big difference between that, and that can't be as much of a mistake, or as simple mistake as getting times mixed up in numbers or letters, you know what I'm saying? So there's a bit of a problem. I don't know if Kaden is attention seeking and wants it to be more than it is, or what for it to be more so a murder. Why would people want that? Renee says, I was on scene, the highway, for maybe a few minutes. Yet Kaden said, Renee, you ever heard Renee at the house talking to her daughter Jasmine about being at the highway for 30 minutes? How do you get that mixed up? Unless Renee said 3 minutes, Kaden misheard it and thought she said 30 minutes. That's all I can think of at this moment. The point of being at the scene was to check in on Jack Newton, or one of the reasons. Renee said, I was told to leave, so I went to the house. All the boys were asleep, per the girls, and the girls were in the driveway crying. I don't know how Kaden thinks he overheard any conversations between me or Jasmine in regard to that 30-minute time spent at the highway. When Kaden only came out of the house right before he left. He did in fact ask, what about these guns in his Jeep? which guns were those then? And I said I would take them and get them to Jack's. Why would Jack need multiple guns given to him? I thought it was only mentioned that Jack had one firearm, the AR-15. What other firearms did Jack have and why, from how it's worded here? Anyone that knows me knows guns scare the hell out of me. What kind they were, right, that's consistent now at least. I don't know why me taking guns to the owners is such a big deal. It's not in a way, but if some of those guns belong to the owners that are already present at the party, it just doesn't make sense. You're taking it away from them to then give them back to them later. Unless there was additional firearms that were still at the house, but the owners were not. But how irresponsible is it for owners to just leave their firearms behind? It's very reckless regardless, isn't it? The only other mention why, and depending on how you could interpret it as a problem, is that if Renee is dismissing or more so just like brushing it off, saying, hey, Kaden, or hey, party goers, don't be cleaning up the beer cans or anything from the party. The police are going to know a party took place. There is no point in tidying up. Okay. There's no point making any adjustments. There's no point moving anything. So why, Renee, should the firearms be an exception then and taken away? The party took place, the people were present, and so were the objects, inanimate objects. If the alcohol, the bottles or bits and bobs along the way remain at the scene and nothing is cleaned, like Renee says, for weeks because they want that opportunity open, or more so from the homeowner's decision, as it was quoted by Renee, to not clean anything up because they wanted it all natural DNA, nothing adjusted, nothing tampered with, so police could have an opportunity to go on down if they wished to, if they proceeded on, and then they could find stuff if needed. If that's all been said by Renee in a previous paragraph, then why is Renee also saying how, well, it's been made out to be something, but it's not, that the firearms did need to be taken and returned back to their owners? But, you know, if you're going to keep the house as it is, like with all the party stuff, the guns were there at the time of the party, the people were there with the guns at the time of the party, so whatever stays at the party should remain at the party. You shouldn't make one exception, one rule for one rule for something else different. It should all remain as it is. You start picking and choosing, that's a problem. So that is a counterpoint to Renee Millan there. Whilst yes, the firearms should be returned back to owners, maybe they should remain at the scene. Oh, well, you thought it was a hit and run at the time, so likely guns weren't involved. Doesn't matter. You could say, why keep that beer can? Why keep that paper cup, that beer pong table there? You know, oh, that wasn't used to kill Noah Presgrove, was it? A paper cup, so we might as well move that away. But they're like, no, we'll keep it there so police can investigate it anyway. Well, the same should apply to the firearm. Maybe the firearm wasn't responsible for Noah's death, but it was still present at the time. It should be seen as a bit of evidence, possibly, to be looked at. But just one rule for a different thing, isn't it? So that's a problem. And it says here, I've told his family the same thing. What's that? Don't know why it's such a big deal when we all thought at the time Noah was hit by a car. Oh. So because we thought at the time Noah was hit by a car, that firearms were just inanimate, just not applicable to the case, so they can be moved. So you're deciding what's evidence and what's not based off what you think is the cause of death at the time, which hasn't been confirmed by police, nor do you have the power to be moving evidence about, but you decide to do so. Yeah, that's a problem. But the mindset mentality behind Renee Millan is a contrast to Kaden Pressy, but the consistency is that they both agree that Noah was hit by a car early on at the stages back then, that they felt one needed the need to clear up the evidence of a party which could link to a hit and run drunk driving situation by Kaden Pressy, but Renee is like, you know what, the firearms can be moved because Noah was hit by a car likely and not a gun, that can be moved away. Nothing to do with getting in trouble supposedly, but we might as well move it on. But as for the party stuff, no. Keep it as it is. The police are going to know anyway, so then the investigation can what? Follow up, and then someone can get in trouble and be blamed from there. Interesting. Kaden Pressy wants to cover for people. Renee Millan doesn't in the same way. Interesting. What else do we have? He, in fact, oh right, Renee says, Kaden did not clean up beer cans because those had already been picked up by the time I had got there. I don't know where that I told him to take the rest of the beer came from. The only time I talked to the kid was literally telling Kaden I'd take the guns to the owner, facepalm. I think the kids were in shock or something because the whole recollection, Kaden's recollection of that morning is off. The timing is wrong. To include times, I think it's absurd that others came forward sharing their recollections of what happened leading up to and after. Can be confirmed by law. Well, thing is, the other party goes that may have given the time in regard to when Renee, husband, Stephanie's boyfriend, showed up. We've not seen it on a public level. So there's a few limitations there. But then it came to, I guess, the comment section or a different post comment section. Robbie Taylor says, do we know what time Renee Millan stopped to check on Jack Newton at the highway? I think that would be a big hit along with the rest of Kaden Pressy's timeline. And Renee Millan says in response, I want to say it had to be around 7 in the morning or a little after 7 that I stopped at the highway. Well, when we compare it to what Renee said here on April 29th, is that I have no clue where people get the information from. No, I didn't clean anything up at the house. I arrived at the house, which was at 7 in the morning. How can you arrive at the house 7 in the morning, but also be at the highway at 7 in the morning? In fairness, though, the best way to interpret it more so would be Renee arrived at the highway at around 7 or just a bit before, but it does say a little after 7, so 7 onwards, a few minutes spent here, and then 7:05, 7:10 arriving at the party house. So there are still a few little discrepancies here with what Renee says in regard to the time of when arriving at the highway and the same time roughly as in regard to when arriving at the house. For Renee to say I arrived close to 7 at the party house, but to say I arrived at the highway, which was first, you'd get to the highway first before the house, you arrived at the highway after 7, that makes no sense whatsoever. I would still say that what Renee is mainly getting at is arriving at the highway at about 7 and then onwards eventually getting to the party house. But how it's worded by Renee isn't as clear as how I've just worded it there. So it is a little disappointing, but it is what it is, right? Renee says it takes about 40 to 45 minutes for me to get to Terrell, like how she said in a previous post. I saw a few volunteer firefighters, Jack Newton, Caleb Newton father, and Caleb's dad, which is Jack's grandfather. I noticed one police officer. I didn't really look at anything beyond that because I didn't want to see Noah's body. I told my daughter Stephanie, her boyfriend, and my husband to not look either. We didn't need to see him like that, fair enough. I never saw Tyler Hardy, TH, and it's probably why he never saw me. I was always back from where Noah was when I pulled up. I'm working on getting my damn phone records and Life 360 locations from that morning so I can prove that part of the story being said about me is false. That's all fine and dandy, but has that Life 360 location hard evidence been presented yet after all these months? No. So, yeah, there's room for questioning. Robbie Taylor responds, thank you, Renee. That honestly makes perfect sense with the timeline, especially with Jack Newton's time of calling his dad at 6:05 and it taking about 40 minutes as well for him to drive as well. Question. Moving on to the next point. An individual, just in general, had said that they are an avid hunter. And when they're allowed to go out 30 minutes prior to sunrise, which would be dark lighting, and start getting light, the 5:30 to 6:30. At 6:30 a.m. is roughly still dark. Not saying Kaden's a liar, just his time is off. So in terms of the lighting and the situations, it could be dark to an extent, dark-ish for Renee and dark for Kaden. Consistent now with the lighting, but as for the timing, off. We also need to acknowledge that with Kaden's wording or lack of certain times given in a police interview but given in the public interview on Parts in True Crime, maybe certain details weren't mentioned or added into the police interview because you had to be more truthful and realistic and honest, whereas in the looser, more casual interview, which wasn't monitored by police, you could say a bit more and it could be a bit more inaccurate. You never know, depends how you interpret it based off the language and wording. But this is where it does come into play as well, as a side point. This piece of material can link more so to Renee Millan's timeline and go against Kaden Pressy's, and I've done it in this particular order. The timestamp of this is from the party house, but whilst you've seen it before, we just reiterate it again. September 4th, 2023 at 5:27 a.m. Of course, with time, people have said it's fake this, it's been altered, it's been manipulated, the timestamp, but no one has given hard evidence as a counterpoint to support it. So this is all we're working with at this moment in time. The reason why this is so significant and important, because when you bring it back to the original timestamp of 5:15 in the morning, when Jack burst through the door, announces Noah is dead. Kaden's woken up by the bang, but other people are not. Kaden has to wake up the other guys, including Mikey Lair. Obviously, they'd be a bit shocked or upset. They go down to the highway at 5:21 and only leave when it's 5:30 when they're told to leave. Well, a few minutes before 5:30, this Snapchat at 5:27 shows Mikey Lair still at the party house. And yet it was Kaden that said Mikey was with him at the highway. So someone's telling the truth and someone isn't. It's a bit of a problem. And furthermore, when you look at the faces of the individuals, they definitely don't look like faces of individuals at 5:15 onwards that have been told the news of Noah Presgrove's death, correct? They look completely oblivious to what has gone on or what would follow up next. This particular Snapchat post at 5:27, then at 5:30 supposedly Jack Newton himself waking up, to then at 5:53 heading out, maybe oversleeping or just resting and being a bit lazy. 5:53 finally going towards the highway for the fishing trip, stopped because of what's going on the road, then finds out best friend dead. 6 in the morning onwards, when at the scene of when it happened, 5 minutes later making a call to his father, 40 minutes or so for the father killer to come on down, just like the 40 to 45 minute trip taken for Renee to come on down, in which that was at 6 in the morning or 5:45 to 6 in the morning, which is a rough estimate. Still, as a counterpoint, you could argue and say the 5:45 to 6 in the morning, when Jasmine knows about Noah's death, is still before Jack Newton finds out about Noah's death. Jack finds out about Noah's death firsthand at 6 in the morning. Jasmine Millan finds out at the earliest 5:45 to 6, and Jasmine is at the house. So how would Jasmine know before Jack when Jack's first on scene and Jasmine isn't? That is a problem. The only possible counterpoint could be is that at the very latest 6 in the morning, or just a bit after 6 in the morning, when Jasmine calls mother Renee about what's happened. Okay, how does Jasmine find out though? News travels fast. Maybe Jack Newton tells people? Interesting. I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show my face for this next part because it's just a little bit shaky. Okay, so what other people, like viewers and whatnot, are suggesting that when you combine what Renee Millan had said, the timing of when she arrived, but also before that, the timing of when the call was made by Jasmine, who found out earlier, comparing that or combining that with Mikey Lair's timestamp can go against Kaden Pressy. But then when trying to make sense of Jack Newton's timeline, adding it in to complement it, it's a bit shaky. And the reason why I say that is because what people are getting at is by combining all this together to say that Kaden's time is off by maybe an hour and 15 minutes, like how Stevie Howard has suggested, like how other viewers have suggested in recent time. I don't think the 6:15 times, I don't think the 6:15 timestamp would be supported by Jack Newton and Renee Millan's statements or posts, because it just doesn't quite gel well together. And I'll try and explain it right now. If Jack Newton had prepared himself at 5:53 to set out, and by 6 in the morning on the highway and stopping at the highway further down a mile on where the scene is, 6 in the morning finding out your best friend is dead, 5 minutes later calling your father, is that who Jack first reached out to? If so, fair enough. Renee Millan, though, said 5:45 to 6 in the morning. It's a problem. How would they know first before Jack? At the latest, 6 in the morning would be the same time as when Jack found out. You could argue and say, well, Jasmine Millan found out at 6 at the house because Jack at 6 in the morning at the scene, when finding out, then messaged, called, reached out to Jasmine and said, pass on the message, Noah's dead that way. It would make sense, but it would not support the 6:15 timestamp, because besides the actual timing of when it did happen, 5:15, 6:15, the consensus is, to an extent, with what Kaden had said as a witness to what other outsiders have suggested, like Stevie Howard, is Jack Newton at some point did make it back to the party house to let people know the news, what's happened. Jack Newton had his phone with him in order to be able to call his father at the highway at 6:05. But Jack supposedly physically went down to the party house to actually tell people the news face to face instead of calling or texting them. Interesting. Going through the door and announcing it that way. So to an extent, with what Kaden says there about those details is consistent with what Carter Combs has said, and somewhat consistent with maybe what Stevie Howard and some outsiders have said. The actions of what Jack Newton did and how he told people. It's just the timing is different from people's recollections, from what Kaden could remember, what he believes, than to what other people state themselves. And there might be other partygoers that go against Kaden Pressy, but on the surface level, we've yet to see it. But it's still a problem, because I'm just trying to work out in my head. If people were pushing 6:15 as the time of when Jack Newton went back to the house to let people know, still with Renee's statement online about at the latest 6 in the morning when Jasmine was aware of the death and then reached out to her mother, Renee, Jasmine at the latest 6 in the morning knowing of Noah's death, Jack Newton not even having a chance to make it back to the house to then tell people about the news, it still wouldn't quite gel together. There is still a problem there. Certain statements do not complement one another. That's troublesome. I don't know if anyone else has picked up on that. The possibility of making a mistake with the time. A handful, and those close to Kaden could dismiss it quickly and say, nope, Kaden is correct in 5:15, absolutely 100%. If those same set individuals are saying that with confidence because they've seen the actual evidence, the phone data, fair enough, but the general public have not, so we can't be on the same confidence wavelength, can we? Still somewhat skeptical. All I would say is it's not the first time there's been time discrepancies. It's not the first time it's been proven that one has been out by 30 minutes, if not a bit longer, such as with Brylan slapping Noah. And Kaden said it was 1:30 in the morning, but the actual hard evidence proved that it was 1:05. 25 minutes time difference, 30-minute time difference. There might be some other examples as well, but you get what I'm saying. That as soon as mistakes are made, if there's more and more and more, There's a bit of a pattern, and it's by the same person. Where else could mistakes be made? Not that it's done on purpose, not that it's done intentionally, but it does make you question additional stuff, and it has a knock-on effect. Now, I've not really thought long and hard about it, but, you know, regardless of whether it's 5:15 or 6:15, well, no, actually, the importance more so, the importance of 5:15 to 6:15, depending which time it actually happened at, the announcement of Noah Presgrove's death and the style of doing it in public by Jack Newton himself. Depending which timestamp is the truth, is one more or less a murder, foul play scenario. So like if the news had come out about Noah's death at 5:15, would it be more or less likely a murder foul play situation compared to if the news of Noah's death had come out at a later point, 1 hour 15 minutes later at 6:15 in the morning? 5:15 or 6:15? Out of the two timestamps of when a particular event could have happened, which particular time would be more or less foul play, murder scenario? Is it more likely a murder outcome, a foul play outcome with the 5:15 timestamp or the 6:15 timestamp, or does it not really matter? Maybe we can go into it deeper another time. In terms of the lighting, though, we've had that Snapchat conversation. I'm not too sure if I've got it with me, but maybe we could throw it out there. Because besides the timing, what's the situation and deal with the lighting? Okay? Kaden made a reference that when Renee had got to the house, it was it like dawn or something? Just before sunrise? It was a bit lighter. Jack Newton had said in the Snapchat conversation with Kaden at a later point, months on, when Kaden was with his girlfriend, along with JJ Bumpass and Logan Jernigan. So after the case, or onwards in the case, months on, Kaden at a point in time, up to a point, was able to be around JJ Bumpass, and then things changed after that. I wonder why. But that diner situation where Jack Newton reached out to Kaden via Snapchat, and then it was documented there where Jack said, "Can you retell me the stories about everything and tell me it correctly and clearly? You don't want me to get upset, do you?" Bit weird way of saying it. And Kaden was like, "Bro, the lighting, it was dark." And I'm sure Jack Newton was saying, "No, it was light." And Kaden saying, "No, it was dark. The lights were on. What are you on about? Dark? Light, dark?" Guys, like, side taking, whose side? The dark side, the light side? And then you've got Renee Millan that didn't really mention too much about the lighting. But the other little side factor in the background, which wasn't acknowledged through the material, but we bring it up again with the complimenting of one saying, "Oh, they were an avid hunter, and at such and such a time, the lighting can still be possible at a later point." Just like how Kaden Pressy recounted from his point of view visually, that could apply at a later point. So when Renee did come at a later point, the lighting was still consistent. So Kaden could have got mixed up with the timing due to the way the lighting was, in a way. But what I want to refer back to is the timing of when Kaden had left. Kaden said he left, or he was more so told to leave, at 7 in the morning. But in terms of that road closure or the blockade on the highway, that wouldn't have been there at 7 in the morning, supposedly. It would have been there later onwards. I don't know if that was through a news report or some confirmation, but I did do a previous video of it at some point previously. That it would have been 7:30 or 7:40. Take in mind with the road closure, how does that tie in with Renee Millan? I'm not too sure if I've got a screenshot of it, but let me try and look for it now. If I can't find it, I'll just do a jump cut. So I managed to find it, thankfully. The context behind this is from what a viewer had to say previously with the knowledge that they know of. All I would say if there is hard evidence by ODOT, if there is like a link to that Department of Transportation in regard to when the call was made and the timing of it all taking place about the road closure, if there is a link to any of it, hard evidence, the original source, can someone provide it down below in the comment section or somewhere that could reach out to me? That would be appreciated. But let's just work with what we've got here. Alicia says Kaden Pressy had to take the back roads due to the highway being blocked off. Kaden Pressy did mention that in the interviews, what we heard today from the past. Kaden says he left around 7 in the morning, as like what Kaden had said in the interviews, what we listened to today. However, Oklahoma Department of Transportation called the 911 dispatcher back at 7:09 in the morning, saying they would be there in about 30 minutes to flag the traffic. So, if it's true that Kaden had left the party house at 7 in the morning, or close to 7 in the morning, and that Kaden also said that he had to take the back roads, why would he need to when the road would have still been open at that time, based off the dispatcher and the call saying that they would be there to like close the highway off in 30 minutes onwards, which would be closer to around 7:40. And by 7:40, Kaden would be long gone by then and would have made it on the way back home, making it back home. So this counters Kaden Pressy's time of when he had left, based off Kaden saying, you can't have it both ways, supposedly. As in, you might have left at 7, but you couldn't have taken the back road. You should have just gone north down the highway because it would have been still open at that time. But if it was closed, well, then you couldn't have left at 7. You would have had to have left at 7:30, 7:40, as it's mentioned here, because that's when it was closed, the highway. But in fairness, what's this? This supports Renee's side of arriving at the scene around 7, being able to make it to the scene when police were there or some presence was before it was truly closed off. So he was still able to pass through the area. So I understand that. Yes, I understand it more now. And the house a few minutes after that, yes, the road was not blocked at that point. Yeah, when Renee got there. But it was when Kaden left. So in that order, the timing of it, it's like the reverse way around. When Kaden said he had left, that's the time when Renee had arrived. When Renee had arrived, that's the time when Kaden left. But if Kaden left at the time of when Renee arrived, then how can Renee be at the highway and have access to it, but Kaden can't, so he's got to take the back road. Yeah. And if you've got access to the highway, if you can stop there and you can pass through to get to the house like Renee did, it would mean if it's at 7, like how she says, that's the time of when the road wasn't closed off. But it was closed off for Kaden. It's dodgy, isn't it? Yeah. So Kaden left. He would have to have left after around 7:40 onwards. All of Kaden's stuff points to him being an hour off in time. See, at the end of the day, the different pieces what we've looked at today, some may counter Kaden's 5:15 timestamp, but most others, or bits and bobs along the way, have countered Kaden Pressy's timing of when Renee had arrived at the house, with what Renee says herself, and compared to what Jack may have said, the lighting situation. The Mikey less Snapchat post counters the original 5:15 timestamp, which is a nail on the head in a way, because that's what's needed first. But what I want to make clear is, if you're in a situation where the originator, the original key timestamp of where it all started, which would be 5:15, if you can't debunk that with certain evidence, but you can debunk later times after that point, it can still have a knock-on effect, but backwards, leading back to 5:15 being debunked by chain reaction. You'd normally want to aim and, cut the head off the Hydra immediately and sort that. And the head of the Hydra would be 5:15. That's where it starts from. That's the root cause of which starts off all the other times after that. The timing of when Kaden arrived at the highway, influenced by the original time of when the news came out about Noah's death. The time of when being told to leave the highway is linked back to the originator of when the time of death was announced, of the time of death, event, time, then leading on to the next course of action, arriving and then leaving, then returning back, and then onwards and onwards. As a knock-on effect, and timestamps that have a chain reaction and a link, whether you debunk the beginning or the end, it can lead back and counter all the others. So it's still possible. So the situation with the road closure, like with 7 in the morning, it's not closed, hence why Renee, based off when she said she arrived, was able to make it the highway and pass through. If it was completely blocked, Renee wouldn't be able to get anywhere near, would have to take the back roads, and there was no mention of that. Is there any counterpoints, though, in defence of Kaden Pressy to make sense of it in any way, shape or form? If Kaden had said it was 7 in the morning when he had left, 6:30, 30 minutes before Kaden had left, Renee had arrived. And at 6:30, highway not blocked off, fair enough. But 30 minutes later, highway was blocked off. So Renee got through, but Kaden couldn't, so took the back road. That would make sense. But if that ODOT, or whatever it's called, states that at around 7:30 onwards is when the highway is truly blocked and closed off, it would mean anything before that wasn't blocked off. Meaning when Kaden said he had to take a back road because the road was blocked off, he wouldn't need to because it was still open. So why would Kaden get that mixed up then? Which would then possibly put in doubt the timing of the 7 in the morning timestamp, which then could have a backwards effect on the timing of then when Renee actually showed up, meaning it pushes it back and forth and all over the place, creating time differences, big ones. The gap widens and widens and widens, and it kind of undoes itself, unravels. I don't know if that's clear enough, but that's where we're at this moment in time. It's not an attack on Kaden Pressy, it's just trying to group all the bits and bobs together. And in some ways, depending on how you look at it, there seems to be more collective counterpoints which go against Kaden, whilst Kaden is the only one standing that has his time. It might have been mentioned and muttered about there are some friends or partygoers in the background that back up Kaden Pressy's timeline. That would be positive, but we've not seen it publicly. So once again, we're just basing it off words of other people and representatives, which isn't good enough. See, what Renee Millan says, her statement countering Kaden, you can believe it, you can disagree with it. All I would say is it's just a statement in her words and nothing else. Her Life 360 app, which would prove it to be true and counter Kaden, we've yet to see that, so it's still just words and a bit of hot air. But the exception being the Snapchat post, which is a form of hard evidence because it's an actual photo relevant to the people, to the party, an actual timestamp given. And yes, people still say it's not good enough because it's been manipulated the time, because the same individuals that have those photos or passed them on to be distributed have done it in the past, have got form for it. But the people that do jump to it and say it's been manipulated, do you have hard evidence and proof to prove that? I've yet to see that. So we stick by and stand with the timestamps being 5:27, Mikey at the party house smiling and happy with Jasmine and Logan, and Kaden saying, well, Mikey at that time was at the highway with us, post news of Noah's death, so we're upset and crying. First of all, the issue of, well, Mikey can't be in two places at once, so one timestamp's right, one timestamp's wrong. It puts the 5:15 in doubt. But furthermore, the second one is the emotions displayed. If by some chance Kaden had said, me, Brylan and Isaac went to the highway to check in on Noah, whilst Mikey stayed at the house because of his PTSD. Besides the timing, and besides the issue of who was where and who was not, that may not be an issue, but just the facial expressions, the body language and emotions would still have conflict. Mikey could have remained at the house, Kaden could have gone to the highway. But you wouldn't think Mikey would be smiling and happy the way they are if they've just heard about Noah's death, meaning likely they didn't know about Noah's death at the time of 5:27 when that photo was taken because they were still smiling. So it would be onwards, later, at a different point when the news came out. What, at 6:15? Well, if you compare it with Renee's statement and when Jasmine found out between 5:45 and 6, That's 15 minutes earlier from when Jack would have come down to tell people. So it doesn't quite link there, but likely after 5:27 when the news came out about the death of Noah and when it was passed on down to the house physically as a messenger by Jack. That's how it comes across. And look, it tells a story. We're telling a story, we're making sense of it with statements, material, and a bit of hard evidence. And when an action like that is done, what do other people do? From certain sides, they complain, whinge and whine and jump to the gun and say, oh, you've gone to the dark side now. Your daddy now is Darth Vader. Your hand's going to get cut off. Naughty boy. What? Can I do a Darth Vader voice? Do I look like I've got asthma? I don't think so. But, you know, people just jump in at the deep end, and supposedly from last night, that's what happened with some viewers that were just looking at it from different perspectives and chatting with others, then being called out as joining the dark side. All kinds of stuff going on there. But you know what, regardless of what's happening, it just goes to show that when people have a go at me for pettiness or have a go at me for drama or unnecessary stuff with group chats and messages and screenshots which may portray people in a negative light, and it can be dismissed easily. But, oh, well, no, you shouldn't be doing it anyway, Warlike Rafa. Oh, I'm sorry. You know, the conversations that have come out from last night and what may have transpired and what Justin Roy and some other people may believe in or feel is the case is because of catalyst like wrath for showing screenshots in the first place, for asking the right questions and possibly some answers coming out along the way, which then leads to more discussions down the line. This is what I mean. In life, I am catalyst like wrath. Sometimes good, sometimes I shouldn't have to be. And that's in other areas. I shouldn't have to be the catalyst all times. You know, just I don't agree with that. But that aside, besides little fancy names and labels and titles, of course, don't want to go too far there because the bandwagon of labels in regard to who's a narcissist and who isn't may come about. Supposedly that's what happened last night. On watching on later recap, the chat replay, some mention about, this narcissist thinks this or that. Not that it was aimed towards me, but I think it was more so a joke about other people that are narcissist or are labelling others as narcissist. Let me tell you one thing as a quite an observant fact, is that regardless of what case you look at, true crime related, there'll always be at least one individual about that will like to throw the term narcissist about like sweets. And it's said so often and used so much that it loses its meaning. And I have said it before that when it comes to life, when it comes to certain wording, certain words and lines and the meaning and depth that they can have, and even emojis as well, that I will only ever reserve them for certain moments, the appropriate nature, the environment, and the person or people that are around and present. Whilst it might sound very formal and boring, the reason why I am and do and say what I do is because I don't want to confuse anyone or give mixed signals in different ways. Other people can be very expressionate of themselves in positive ways, in dark ways or whatnot, but it may not always, you know, the message may not always pass on clearly to the recipient. You know, what would be like a good example? To be honest, I can't really think of one on the spot, if I'll be honest with you. But, you know, in regard to the case, calling everyone here and there a narcissist, do you actually know what the meaning of it is? Are people just using it because they like using buzzwords? But, you know, as I said, you use something too much or a range of people overuse a word, it loses its meaning with time. That's why when it comes to words that I may use or lines or emojis, I'll only use them at times or may only use them with a singular person because it's more meaningful in my mind that if I was to use them willy-nilly, then it would lose its meaning and purpose behind it. And that because I myself in the past have been on the receiving end of mixed signals in different ways, in a case, in a community, there's been misunderstandings, and in more informal situations over time, they say or do something which doesn't link to what I am thinking or receiving, so there is miscommunication, and there is damage caused. See, other people can be the cancer. I don't want to become that. I might have not high standards, I just have specific standards, which could be considered a bit formal and boring, but I do it because I don't want to cause harm to other people. Just like how I look right now, it is what it is. I'm not adjusting, I'm not adding, I'm not filtering. What you see is what you get, whether it's good or bad. I don't want to deceive people. If I look like a mess, fair enough. I don't want to hide that. I don't want to cover it, because if I did, that would be deceiving people. So when they see the real thing, it's going to be, oh, you've hidden that. Other people will have different expressions and outlets and other reasonings behind what they do. That's fine. But me, I do it a certain way because I feel it's important, it's needed, and it causes less damage. I've been on the receiving end of damage. I know what people can do and can act like. I try not to be like that, so that's why I do what I do and how I word things, language, wording, formally and in other situations as well. But we want to talk about the reference of like narcissist and lines like that. Yes, at times they've been labelled and thrown at me. At what points then? Could it be at a time of when I'm being light-hearted, I change my tone, my voice, I say some dodgy things, and people actually believe it to be a certain way? The reason why at times I will change my voice because it's light-hearted, I might do a really high-pitched squeaky voice because I'm clearly taking the piss, I'm not actually being serious. But then other times, granted there'll be exceptions where I might be a bit more serious or there's a bit more meaning behind it, but that tone of voice is only the way it is just because it helps me to focus more than if I was to say it in my normal voice where I might end up cringing. So there's different meanings for different situations. Obviously, I'm just demonstrating introspection right now. But we did like a little Beauty Gurumo acting class, even though the makeup's not quite applied because Beauty Gurumo has turned up to the studio too late, too busy doing some TikTok videos. Well, I'll let you off. It's okay, Beauty Gurumo. What would be an example of how people could label me falsely as a narcissist when it's not actually the case? But through the language and behavior, it can be interpreted or misinterpreted. Let's do like a really rough, rugged example right now. 3, 2, 1. Yes, you. You know exactly who you are. I'm looking right at you, deep into your eyes. You can see and you can feel clearly who you are. Oh, you and you. No. There is only one. There is only one in the mind and one somewhere else. Oh, where do you think I'm going? Not far. Only one upon the heart. Obviously the camera angle's reversed, so I'm pointing in the wrong area. I am a doctor, so I've got it all under control. The heart is beating at a certain rhythm, but will it change? Who knows? But speaking of you, I hope you're listening very clearly right now. Maybe trying to hide behind some sheets or behind a chair. There's nowhere to run. Shh, calm yourself, because you know as well as I do, I can make you very, very wet in seconds. Nothing you can do about it. Almost like as the floodgates are released, you get soaking wet all over your clothes. And through that action, you may become a little sore, and then the following day, your body hurts a little bit more because of me. Because I'm just that fucking good. You know. Because when it comes to humor and lightheartedness, if you've got a drink in your hand and you laugh, your involuntary reflexes may jolt your arm upwards. You may spill liquid upon yourself. If it's water, easier. If it's juice, could be very sticky, residue on your shirt, your pants, or wherever. Or even tears of laughter. You may cry through laughing very hard. Tear ducts leads to water dripping down the face onto the shirt. and you get a bit wet that way. And in terms of being sore, well, your stomach can be very sore from laughing so hard. Your throat and back of the mouth could be very sore from laughing a lot, and the vocal cords and the strain in the neck tensing depending on how you laugh, whether you quack like a duck or howl like a monkey. Depends from person to person. And if someone is that funny that they can have an effect on someone that laughs so hard, hence why they could wet themselves in a way. And of course, based off witnesses and patients, people, it's very evident that what's been said just then is actually a fact and not a narcissistic claim. So it's all under control. It's all under control. But hopefully you found this video somewhat interesting, and be sure to hit the like button, share the video, and we'll see where it goes. Tried keeping it as focused and as deep as tonight in regard to the case and Kaden Pressy. It does seem like it's one against all and more material stacked against Kaden in different ways on the timeline spectrum. It's unfortunate. There might be evidence out there to support Kaden as proof and phone data, but we've yet to see it publicly, so that's unfortunate. This is not an attack on Kaden Pressy, and this is not exclusive to Kaden. If it was anybody else, or there was an opportunity anywhere else, then the same focus and counterpoints would be done if possible. It's just that some expose themselves online more than other people. But in fairness, let's acknowledge when it comes to Kaden Pressy, it wasn't his choice. He didn't ask for that private police recorded interview to be leaked because of other people. If that police interview was never leaked, we wouldn't know of all the other discrepancies when comparing it to the Partners in True Crime one. Hence, Kaden Pressy wouldn't be as questioned as much. So other people's actions have indirectly led to Kaden Pressy being on the receiving end much more, which is unfortunate. But let me just add in, additionally, that details mentioned in the Partners in True Crime interview don't quite translate or are added into the official police recorded interview. Kaden's wording of, I don't want people to get in trouble, so I'll tidy up after them so they stay safe because of that hit and run possibly of Noah Presgrove. Those same lines were not mentioned when around police, probably because Kaden didn't want to get in trouble or for it to be taken the wrong way. And the timing of Renee, how long she was actually at the highway for, Partners in True Crime, 30 minutes. Police interview, no mention whatsoever. The time of the actual time in words, in actual timestamp 6:30, given in Partners in True Crime, but not clearly stated the same way in wording as the police interview, thus meaning, based off overall the language and wording, a little bit of uncertainty, not enough confidence that it's open for interpretation. I mean, you're not completely sure about the time, you're not going to give the exact time, especially when you're in the presence of police that want the truth and nothing but the truth. So if you used to take away the Partners in True Crime interview and only listen to the police recorded interview, comparing the police recorded interview with the Renee Millan statement, there's not as many discrepancies unless you looked into it a bit deeper and added the 30 minutes to an hour on to the time of when Kaden had made it back to the house to watch TV with that length of time spent watching and consuming it, then you would add it up to 6:30. But, you know, if you want to be a little bit awkward and say, well, no actual direct timestamp was given, then it's not as contrasting to Renee Millan, who is giving a time, if you want to put it that way. But then again, if you used to say, well, 5:30 is when they had made it back and it was mentioned in the interview, but then after that, the direct time wasn't quite given, literally, as clear as Partners in True Crime. The whole Renee Millan situation is more so her side and her event in regard to 6:30 onwards, and in her situation, 7 in the morning onwards. It still links back to the 5:15 timestamp overall, where it can cast doubt upon other things or cast doubt back onto the previous thing because of other stuff being counted, of course. But the Renee Millan situation to Kaden Pressy's timeline recollections originates from 5:15, but it's more so about the timing of when Renee arrived and not the timing of when Noah's death was announced at the 5:15 mark. But Renee, you know, with mentioning Jasmine Millan's name of 5:45 to 6, Jazz finding out at that time, cause of death, that can be used to counter Kaden Pressy's to some extent, but not enough to complement Jack Newton's timeline of maybe it was 6:15 when Jack had made it back to the house to let Kaden Pressy know and others, because that would be a 15-minute time difference, 15 minutes earlier where Jasmine finds out before Jack and then Jack tells people that doesn't make any sense. It's still a mess. Let's just put it that way. But one thing that isn't as messy is that Snapchat post. And isn't it typical how a photo can tell 1,000 words and different stories without any actual physical words present or statements? It reveals a lot more, just the expressions of the people within and even the odd timestamp given. That is less cluttered than all the statements by countless people with time. But if in this particular case there was just more hard evidence, more photos, more videos, and less talking, it'd be a lot easier to interpret and understand. And maybe with time, some things can be released later and we get a better understanding then. Because I think the actual material, the hard evidence, is clearer to understand than words and statements of people, which can change with time, and poor language and wording can be interpreted wrongly as well. So my name's War Like Wrath. Hopefully you found the video somewhat interesting. I'll leave it there for now, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. Good night for now.